Hi,
And
can you hear me now?
yeah, can you hear
Oh,
me?
great. And I can see you properly as well now. Okay, brilliant.
Okay.
So just to recap, I know people have rejoined. Thank you so much for coming back and for your patience. We're talking about the bottom drawer. We're talking about the first works of inspiration with poet and songwriter Pavana Reddy. And we had just started on our first question. So in case you didn't hear earlier on, we'll take some questions towards the end from you. So please do send those over maybe towards the end in caps, if that would be okay, so that I can easily see them and note them down. But we'll start with talking about Pavana's first inspirations in poetry and what brought her to writing it.
Yeah, just to continue what I was saying before,
Yeah.
I didn't start poetry. I just started writing just thoughts, that kind of turned into stories. And I did have a little journal. I mean, ever since I was a kid, and I'm the same way now, I really like to vent about things, and that's kind of how the whole journaling thing started, where I feel like I can't really tell anybody this, but this is how I'm feeling, so I'm just gonna write it down. And that kind of grew into like a love for just creating stories. And when I really got into writing, that's when I started reading a whole lot more and, figuring out what kind of work I really liked. And while I was doing that, I realized that I really tended to gravitate towards poetry and, poetry books. And so I started reading a lot of Rumi and Sarojini Naidu and just a lot of authors that weren't taught in school. There were books that I had to go find on my own, or I'd borrow it from friends. And that's how I really kind of broadened my horizon, authors and a diverse background.
Mm.
And yeah, that's how it started. And I was really young too. I was like maybe 7, maybe younger. And I was reading, I think my first poem was about a book called The Last Unicorn. And so I wrote a rhyming poem about a unicorn. And then it got like put on the author's website. And
Oh, what was it about?
it was a book called The Last Unicorn by Peter Beagle
Mhm.
a long time ago. And it was just like fantasy novel that I was in love with. I was obsessed with it. So I wrote a poem about a unicorn. And the author of the book actually saw it and put it on his website. So still when we had like dial-up. And oh my God, at that point I was like, oh my God, I actually have like a future in this. As I just kept writing.
That's really cool. I love that you were on a fan site first. That's so cool.
Oh,
But also published at 7 years old. I mean, that's fantastic.
he just put it on his website and was like, this is cute.
But was that at that point though, did you think, oh, seeing your work out there in the world for the first time is such an experience. I don't know, it's quite hard to explain, isn't it? When suddenly you feel that you have readers. I think that's the thing, and people are seeing your work. And did you think about it back then, do you think, like an idea of poetry as a career?
No, never. And I didn't go into it thinking of it as a career. I did it just as a hobby. And, my name, Maza Dohta, that was there because I wasn't publishing my name with my work initially. So I'd had like a pseudonym. And then when I realized that people really liked it, that's when I started putting my name next to it. But yeah, I
Right.
never wanted to have so many people, relate to my work. I think it's an amazing feeling.
Yeah, yeah. Going back to the inspirations that you mentioned, I mean, Rumi, for example, he's so well known now, I think partly because of the internet, but I don't think, like when I was growing up, people really knew Rumi all that well. I feel like he's just very easy to take a few lines of his, and they have such an impact, and the power of just the way that he words things. But where did Rumi come from, and how did you manage to find him?
I think for the same reason, when I was looking for poets that weren't white, when I was researching, Rumi was one of the most popular poets that came up. And then it was Tagore. But I also noticed that with Rumi, even now, his work is still taken out of context. Like he's extremely popular, but for small pieces, when they're taken from long, long sonnets. And it's kind of funny how Rumi has become like kind of the, I don't know, prototype for Instagram poetry because you
Yeah.
think short, but it's not. Um, but yeah, that's where it started, and I really, he's the one who led me to Tagore and to Sarojini Naidu and all these other authors. But I still love Rumi. Like I don't feel like there's any other writer like him to this day, and that's one writer that I can always go back to and find something new.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I guess we're reading him in translation as well, or at least, I'm always reading him in English. Yeah. Um, so that leads me to talking about form and technique and style and voice a bit. It sounds like you were already thinking about those things actually from quite early on in your work, and the white canon and putting that to one side and actually your poetry ancestors, for your work kind of being people that you sought out that were not white, and they also have used very different forms. I mean, Rumi writes sonnets, but it's also different sort of lyrical poetry, I guess, from where it comes from in terms of the source language. Was that something that you were conscious of doing, or did you at some point kind of go, wait, these poems look so different to what I've learned at school, Keats, the Romantics, whatever?
In terms of format or just like the way I write?
Yeah, form or just finding your voice and style, maybe, those sorts of things. Could you talk a bit about how much they connected maybe with Rumi or not at all, and how much that was something that you were thinking about early on?
When it comes to style, I think that's the last thing I think about. I never write my poetry to match a certain style. When I say that, like, was inspired by Rumi, it's more of inspired by all the topics that can be written about and the way they can be written about. The extreme use of, being able to, or description, that was one thing that really got me to Rumi and Tagore, were their use of language and how to describe something, like something as small as a moment, and turn an entire story out of that. And that was what I wanted to do. So poetry is, it's been constantly evolving. It's still evolving. I still don't really know what my actual style is, but I do know that I'm always trying to find new ways to write about different feelings and
Mm.
different ways to do that. Challenging myself. Sometimes they can be long poems, sometimes they're short. It really depends. It depends on the story that I'm trying to tell.
Mm. And so you were kind of doing that brain flex, kind of a conceptual um, switch that happens in your head when you see something turned around, a feeling turned around, or a moment kind of turned around and looked at from a different angle, or maybe taken apart into its component parts. Yeah. But that was happening very early on for you then, if you were thinking about capturing stories from moments, maybe as a teenager, was it around that age that your bottom drawer stuff would have occurred and been written?
No, it actually started way before that. Definitely way before that. And, yeah, I started writing when I was 7, but like it started off with really just light, work that didn't really have any dark feelings in it. But then, stuff happens while you're growing. So around 11, I think, is when my work took a darker turn. And I was like, okay, there's a lot of stuff I need to unpack in my life. And I think poetry is going to be the way I do it. So, yeah, I have a lot of stuff that I'll probably never show anybody. That's just hidden in my drawer. And I've had it
Yeah.
there since a child. Yeah, it's actually pretty weird thinking about it. I'm like, I've been writing my entire life almost, and just telling the page things that I haven't been able to tell anybody else.
Do you go back to that bottom drawer now? Have you read anything you wrote when you were 11 for any of the recent works that you've published by any chance?
Yeah, I do. I go back a lot. Sometimes I don't necessarily take the poems and use those, but there are certain themes or topics I've written about, or, ways that I was trying to express something that might inspire a different poem or, new work.
Thank you. Well, it feels like this might be a good point to hear a poem or two, if that would be okay. Um, Whatever you like, really. You've got a couple of collections, and maybe if they're short, maybe you could do two or three, entirely up to you.
Yeah, here, I'll just read two poems from Rangoli. I'm just going to pick them.
Okay.
This book is 3 years old and I still don't know where any of my favorite poems okay. My mother swallowed her voice, so when she spoke, others would listen. But when she cries, I hear her native tongue. When my mother cries, I know how long she has been silent. Like a lotus bathed in dirt, some people are drenched in pain, but you can never tell by the way they blossom. Those are both from Rangoli, my baby.
Thank you so much. I feel like, having looked at your poems from Rangoli mainly, actually, there are some themes that I see that are very present, physical things, in addition to the emotional, just movements of the human that you kind of look at so well. And I wondered if some of those physical things, like the brown female body, often I see quite a lot of nature imagery in this work as well. Are those themes things that you've been obsessed with for a long time, do you think?
Yes, nature is a very huge theme in my work. I use it a lot, actually. I like to feel like there's a connection with maybe pain and nature. And once you find that connection, it's a little bit easier to handle personally. So I'm always trying to find examples in nature to relate my work to. Hi, Kenny.
um, and I wonder, is there a continuous thread beyond those sorts of themes of nature and the body and so on, that you found yourself just being preoccupied with? The form, I noticed with the Rangoli poems, they're short and they're almost like little sculptures or small paintings. They kind of give me that feeling of there's something visual beyond the poem that's going on with them. Is that something that you can kind of see coming back to you, or anything else like that in terms of the form?
Um, Kind of. I think that's one of the main reasons why I like the short form, because normally my poems actually start out really long, and I spend time with them to make them as concise as possible. Only when they need to be. Some poems are meant to be long, and I leave them when they do. But the short ones, I do like to find a way to make a statement that has a bigger picture behind it and let the reader go ahead and paint that photo for themselves. I hope,
And things I was, oh, sorry,
but I hope I
did I
answered your
interrupt you?
question. No, no, no.
Yeah,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
you just
Go
cut
on.
out a little bit there. So if I didn't, okay, okay, great. I was thinking about, I was so fascinated with Rangoli, which was a word that I wasn't aware of. We were talking about this yesterday when we were chatting, and Rangoli is a South Asian art form where patterns are painted on the ground using different material and stuff. And I'm sure you can talk a bit more about it because I understand your mother has made these sorts of paintings, works, however you want to describe them. But we also, as a Bangladeshi person, we also have something similar in our culture, which is called alpana, which is you know, patterns, beautiful, generally abstract patterns on the ground. And I was really interested in that as an influence and how it dovetails maybe with the poetry in Rangoli as a influence outside of words.
So I grew up watching my mom do Rangoli my whole life. You know, whenever we move into a new place or if we needed good luck with something, it was a tradition since I can remember. And it made the most sense to have my book named after that and actually have a Rangoli design on the cover. The cover is an actual design that my mom made, and we just took a fit, inverted the colors, and that's the cover of the book. And it made sense because the book is basically a story about my family. So it's kind of welcoming the reader into our little home. That's why Rangoli is on the cover.
That's gorgeous. And could I ask you a little bit in that case to welcome somebody? I just, that's so gorgeous to welcome somebody into your book in that way and to welcome somebody into your story. Could you say a bit more about that? And, you know, maybe if it connects with why you started writing poetry, if indeed it, you know, that was what you started with as well.
Sorry, can you repeat the first part? You kind of cut out.
Oh, sure. I was just wondering if you're to invite somebody into your collection with Rangoli on the cover, that's really beautiful, and to invite them into your story in that way as well. And it being about family, could you say a bit about that and why poetry felt like a good space to talk about your family and maybe a bit about your background, you know, writing in English, but obviously from a South Asian background and how those work together?
Um, I don't I don't know if I wrote consciously, like wrote about my family poetry necessarily. It was more, you know, I write about my life and my experiences. And if it wasn't poetry, it would probably be, you know, a story about my family or something else. Um, you know, my family played such a big role in my life, and they still do, and they have a huge influence on the way I think, and especially my mom has such a big inspiration in my life, and so present in my work. And I think make movies, I'd probably still my family. So there's really no escaping it with them. They are a part of everything I do. They're also my biggest judges. So
That's wonderful. Um, okay, so I wonder if maybe we could have a few more poems, and then maybe we might take some questions soon from the audience as well. If anyone has any questions, please post them. I will note them down. But would you mind doing a few more poems for us, please?
I'll read two from Where Do You Go Alone? Let me pick. There's like 300 poems in this. I never know which one to pick. Okay. To think of love now is to imagine a stem without petals, of leaves that die in the fall, for we were never meant to last. I was so hungry for warmth. I fell for your touch like winter starved of spring. So tired, I stripped the layers covering my heart, knowing I'd never be warm again. I'm searching for a word to describe that overwhelming feeling of thirst in the midst of an ever-expanding ocean. But all I can think of is you. I've named many bodies of water in your name, and they have all drowned me just the same.
Thank you.
Is that enough? Should we do one more?
Can we have one more? They're so lovely. I'd love to hear one more.
Your eyes to take a sip of coffee. A train outside. Sorry.
I'm so sorry.
Can I start
We lost
again?
you. Yes, please.
Well, you were low. But then you set down your cup as the train disappeared into the distance. Meet mine.
Pavana, I'm so sorry. We lost you. Do you mind starting one more time? Yeah.
Your light passed through me like a light through a. Now anyone I allow inside falls in love. Hopefully you guys heard that one.
Thank you so much. Yes, I managed to hear it. Hopefully other people did. The comments are one more, please. One more. They are so beautiful. We could do one more. If people have, I have one question so far. If anyone has a question, please post it in the comments. Would you like to do one final poem before we go to questions?
There is no poetry in loving someone who is in love with someone else. There are no words to describe the pain in knowing I am like the dirt giving shelter to your roots, while you are the tree dancing freely with the winds.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions. One question was from Asta Kimasara, who asks, can you suggest some poets whose poems, I think she means whose poems you really like, and she says one line can change your world. So somebody who's a single line of poetry that changed the way that you thought.
That's gonna take some thinking on my hands. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and answer that question in my stories.
Okay, great.
Later.
I love that. Yes, let's continue the conversation. Awesome. And Chelsea asks, How did publishing Rangoli come about?
I took poems that I had been sitting on for 6 years and decided to put them together into a book, of my friend. Sorry.
I'm so sorry, Pavana.
Can
You
you hear me?
completely cut out there. Could you start again? We can hear you again now, yeah.
Okay. So Rangoli is a collection of poems that I had been sitting on for about 6 years. And I worked with my family and some friends to put the book together. And it took us probably 2 years to complete it. But yeah.
Did you self-publish?
And it was self-published.
That's so cool. Okay, so Deconversationalist asks, what does writer's block look, feel like for a poet?
I think it's different for everyone. I don't really think there's necessarily writer's block. Like, I don't really think it's a thing. I think that when you're meant to write something, you will. It'll come to you eventually. Just never beat yourself up about it. At least I don't. And it's normal. It's normal not to be able to write sometimes. But it doesn't really feel like the way one would think about writer's block as like this painful, horrible thing that won't get out of your way. It doesn't feel like that. Just that sometimes you need to approach work from a different angle or a different time.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I do wonder, I've had it, not a block. I don't think I've ever experienced writer's block either. It's more like, yes, there is a problem that I can't quite solve, and I don't know how to solve it, and it's very frustrating. Is that
Mhm.
something that you found has happened more during this weird time, during the pandemic and stuff, or have you found it quite easy to write during this time?
I've actually written a lot during this time, but it hasn't, I mean, it's impacted it in a sense that like I can't not write, but it hasn't really impacted my ability to write. I don't feel sharing a lot of the work at the moment like I normally do whenever I write something new. I'm like, oh my God, I want to show everybody. I'm trying to sit on that now and see where it goes. So I've been writing a lot. I just haven't been posting it. I'm gonna see what
Yeah.
happens with that one.
Yeah. I wonder actually, we haven't talked about your Instagram feed and how that reflects poetry for you. Obviously, most of your Instagram is your poetry. And is it something that you think about that platform when you think about putting the stories, the poems out there? Or is it kind of like something that you sort of do on the side?
Uh, how do I post? How do I choose poems?
Yeah, whether publishing your poetry digitally is a consideration, is it a core part of the consideration of getting the poems out there, or are you thinking about collections when you're writing?
Oh, okay. So, or the feeling, what I need to let out, and I don't write poems so they can go into a book. Once you do that, then the book or the poem itself isn't as real. It doesn't feel as real. The only time I like write about a certain theme is if I'm being asked or paid to do that, if it's for a certain project. But when it comes to posting my work online,
Mm.
it's always work from a book. If it's not, then no, this is a free write, something that's not in a collection, if I feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, thank you. And then another question we had from Chelsea was, is performing poetry aloud important for your work and your process?
Is it a part of my process?
She asks, is it important for your work on your process?
Oh, to read it out loud? Definitely. It's a huge process. It helps a lot when you're trying to find edits too. Reading your work over and over it, you can't catch the things that you need to change. So reading out loud really helps. It helps set the mood of the poem to how you want that poem to sound, because it might sound differently in your head than when you read it out loud. It's one of my biggest practices. Okay. Can you hear?
Hi, we completely lost you. I just got you back. I think maybe since the connection, we keep losing it, unfortunately. But I want to ask one last question from Kaneo, who asks, would you like to write music someday? And have you done it before? And actually, I happen to have read a previous interview of yours, and I understand that you wrote a song for Anushka Shankar's album, and this idea of reading your poetry aloud, obviously with song, it's allowed. Is that something that you're going to do more of?
I would love to. Yeah, so I did the song with Anushka Shankar, which was actually a poem that was read over music. That was my first time doing something like at that caliber. And it was read by Vanessa Redgrave, which was another,
Wow.
huge. I still don't happened hearing my words coming from that legend. It's can't even describe that feeling. But I do want to write more. I really want to practice. Like, whereas that was a poem written that was read over music, I would really like to hear some of my work as a song, and really practice more with that. So, Kene, if you're down and you want to write with me, I will write you some songs and see where that goes. But something I really, really, really wanted to more, local artists, LA, and like just do cute little projects and have people sing my words. That would be amazing.
Okay, great. So I wonder if we've got one last question that I feel like we should definitely address because it's such a personal question. PS says, is it easy to write from your personal experience? I still have trouble writing about it and staying true to myself. I don't want to be too vulnerable.
Then don't share that work. Like, who are you being vulnerable for? If you're going to be writing and you want to be a good writer, you need to write from experience. You need to dig into the places that aren't comfortable. But when it comes to being vulnerable, what you choose to share with the world is up to you. You're not a poet because other people are reading it. You're a poet because you're a writer. You're writing your poems. Nobody needs to read your truth except you. And that's what makes you a writer. So if you have topics that are so hard to write about that you don't want other people to read, feel better just by writing it down. Write that poem down, feel better that way. It helps me. Like, there's so much that I feel like I couldn't, express to other people. So much poems of mine that I would never share with anybody. And that doesn't mean they're bad poems. There's some things that are extremely personal. And maybe sometimes online you'll feel better about it. But if you feel like it's hard, just know that it's writing about your own experiences, writing about yourself in general is it's tough. And so don't feel like you're not a good writer because of that. It's normal. I deal with it every day.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's brilliant advice. And yeah, I definitely second that as well. The idea that I think with social media and, you know, a lot of people that you might admire being out there, being seen, being read, of course, audiences and readership is important, but the work is important first. And if you're writing it, then you're a writer. I absolutely agree. Yeah, that's the most important thing.